Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the incessant beeping of my alarm clock pierced through the veil of sleep, dragging me reluctantly into consciousness. I groaned, my hand fumbling to silence the irritating device. As the noise ceased, an unsettling quiet settled over my bedroom. Something felt off. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the curtains. The silence was oppressive, almost tangible. Where was the usual chorus of birdsong that greeted me each morning? The distant hum of traffic from Main Street? The muffled sounds of my neighbors starting their day? Unease crept over me as I sat up, the covers pooling around my waist. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. 7:15 a.m. Wednesday, May 15th. No missed calls, no text messages. Strange. My sister, Emma, always sent a good morning text. "Emma," I called out, hoping she might have stayed over after our late-night movie marathon. No response. The silence seemed to mock me. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet hitting the cool hardwood floor. The house felt empty, devoid of the usual morning energy. My heart began to race, an inexplicable panic rising in my chest. "Get a grip, Olivia," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Everything's fine. You're just being paranoid." But as I stood and made my way to the window, the gnawing feeling in my gut intensified. I pulled back the curtains, expecting to see my neighbors' cars in their driveways, people walking their dogs, kids waiting for the school bus. Instead, I was met with an eerie stillness. Empty driveways, deserted sidewalks, not a single person in sight. "What the hell?" I breathed, my fingers pressed against the cool glass. I fumbled for my phone again, my hands shaking as I dialed Emma's number. The ringing echoed in my ear, each unanswered tone ratcheting up my anxiety. "Come on, Em. Pick up, pick up, pick up," I pleaded. Voicemail. I ended the call and immediately dialed again, and again, and again. Each time, I was met with the same result. Panic fully set in as I scrolled through my contacts, calling everyone I could think of. My parents, my best friend Sarah, the principal at the high school where I taught. Every call went unanswered. "This can't be happening," I whispered, my voice cracking. "This isn't real." But it was real. Too real. The silence, the emptiness, the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. It was all horrifyingly real. I threw on a pair of jeans and a sweater, not bothering with socks as I shoved my feet into my sneakers. I had to see for myself. Had to know if this was just my street or if... I couldn't even finish the thought. The front door creaked as I yanked it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. I stepped out onto my porch, the wood cool beneath my feet. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs from Mrs. Henderson's garden next door. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't in her garden. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The curtains in her windows were drawn. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty street. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Not even a stray cat or a fluttering bird. Just nothing. I stumbled down the porch steps, my legs carrying me forward almost of their own volition. I walked down my driveway, then down the sidewalk. House after house stood silent, showing no signs of life. "This isn't happening," I muttered, picking up my pace. "This isn't real. It can't be real." But with each step, with each empty house and abandoned car I passed, the reality of the situation sank in deeper. Everyone was gone, vanished, as if they'd never existed at all. I broke into a run, my feet pounding against the pavement. I ran past the Johnsons' house, where I used to babysit their twins, past the local diner where I had breakfast every Sunday, past the high school where I taught English literature. All empty, all abandoned. Tears streamed down my face as I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Had to find someone. Anyone. I rounded a corner onto Main Street, nearly tripping over my own feet as I came to an abrupt halt. The town square stretched out before me, usually bustling with activity at this hour. Now it was a ghost town. The clock on the old courthouse tower showed 8:05 a.m. Shop windows stared blankly at the empty street. A newspaper stand overflowed with unread papers, their headlines now seeming absurdly mundane in the face of whatever this was. "Hello?" I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. "Is anyone here? Please, someone answer me." My cries echoed off the buildings, mocking me with their return. I spun in a circle, searching desperately for any sign of life. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the distance. My heart leaped into my throat. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms frantically. "Over here! I'm here!" The figure turned, and even from this distance, I could see the shock and relief on their face. They started running towards me, and I found myself moving to meet them halfway. As we drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a man, probably in his early 30s, tall, with dark hair and a scruffy beard. He wore jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking as disheveled and disoriented as I felt. We came to a stop a few feet from each other, both panting and staring in disbelief. "You're real," he gasped, his eyes wide. I thought I was the only one left." "Me too," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. What happened? Where is everyone?" He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I woke up and everyone was just gone. My wife, my neighbors, everyone. I've been searching for hours." "Hours?" I echoed, confused. "But it's only just past 8 a.m. He looked at me strangely. "It's almost noon. I've been up since 5 a.m. I glanced back at the courthouse clock. Still 8:05 a.m. A chill ran down my spine as I pulled out my phone. 11:52 a.m. "Oh God," I breathed, the implications hitting me like a truck. "What's happening to us?" The man took a step closer, his hand outstretched. "I'm Jake," he said, his voice steadier now. "Jake Donovan. I don't live here. I was just passing through, staying at the motel on the edge of town." I took his hand, the warmth of human contact almost overwhelming after the morning's isolation. "Olivia Parker. I teach at the high school here." As our hands touched, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between us. Not romantic or sexual, but something else. Something significant. Jake must have felt it too, because he jerked his hand back, staring at me with a mixture of fear and fascination. "What was that?" he asked. I shook my head at a loss for words. "I don't know. But I think we're connected somehow. To each other. To whatever's happening here." Jake nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I think you're right." We stood there in the empty town square, two strangers united by an impossible situation. The weight of our circumstances pressed down on us, along with the unshakable feeling that this was only the beginning. "What do we do now?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the deserted street. When he looked back at me, there was a determination in his eyes that both reassured and terrified me. "Now," he said, "we find out what happened to everyone, and we figure out why we're the only ones left." As his words hung in the air, a gust of wind swept through the square, rustling the abandoned newspapers and carrying with it the faint, distant sound of something. A whisper? A scream? I couldn't tell. But one thing was certain. Our world had changed irrevocably, and Jake and I were the only ones left to uncover the truth. The town square clock remained frozen at 8:05 a.m., a stark reminder of how time seemed to have stopped for everyone but Jake and me. We stood there, two strangers united by an inexplicable circumstance, the weight of our situation hanging heavy in the air between us. I studied Jake's face, searching for any hint of deception or malice. His hazel eyes met mine, filled with the same mixture of fear, confusion, and desperate hope that I felt churning inside me. "So," I began, breaking the tense silence. "You said you're not from here. Where are you from, Jake?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his gaze darting around the empty square as if still expecting someone else to appear. "Boston," he replied. "I'm a software engineer. I was on my way to a conference in Portland when my car broke down just outside of town last night." I nodded, processing this information. "And you're sure you don't know anyone here? Have any connection to this place at all?" Jake shook his head emphatically. "None. I'd never even heard of this town before yesterday. What about you, Olivia? You said you teach here?" "Yeah, English Lit at the high school," I confirmed, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the school. "I've lived here my whole life, I know." My voice caught and I had to take a deep breath before continuing. "I know everyone in this town, or I thought I did." Jake took a step closer, his expression softening. "Hey, we're going to figure this out, okay? We're not alone in this. We have each other." I wanted to believe him, but suspicion nagged at me. "How do I know I can trust you?" I asked, hating how vulnerable I sounded. "For all I know, you could be behind all of this." His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "Me? I could say the same about you. Maybe you're some kind of, I don't know, government agent or something. And this is all some elaborate experiment." We stared at each other for a long moment, the absurdity of our situation hanging between us. Then, unexpectedly, I felt a bubble of laughter rise in my throat. It spilled out, slightly hysterical, and to my surprise, Jake joined in. "Listen to us," I said, wiping tears from my eyes, accusing each other of, "What, making an entire town disappear?" Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, it does sound pretty ridiculous when you put it like that." As our laughter faded, a somber mood settled over us once more. The empty town seemed to press in around us, a constant reminder of our bizarre predicament. "We need a plan," I said, my teacher instincts kicking in. "We can't just stand here in the square all day." Jake nodded in agreement. "You're right. I think our first step should be to search the town thoroughly. Maybe we missed something or someone." "Okay," I agreed. "But we should stick together. I don't think it's a good idea for us to separate." "Agreed," Jake said. "Where should we start?" I considered for a moment. "Let's start with the residential areas. We'll go house by house looking for any signs of life or clues about what happened." We set off down Main Street, our footsteps echoing loudly in the eerie silence. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice little details that seemed off. Cars parked at odd angles, as if their drivers had vanished mid-journey. A bicycle lying on its side in the middle of the sidewalk. A dog leash trailing from a bench in the park. No dog in sight. "It's like everyone just evaporated," I murmured, more to myself than to Jake. He heard me anyway. "Yeah, it's creepy as hell. Hey, what's that building over there?" He pointed to a large, Victorian-style house set back from the street. "That's the mayor's house," I explained. "Mayor Thompson. He's lived there for as long as I can remember." Jake jogged up the front steps, peering through the windows. "Looks empty, like everywhere else. Should we go in?" I hesitated. "I don't know. It feels wrong to just break into people's houses." Jake turned to me, his expression serious. "Olivia, I get it, but we need answers, and right now, this is the only way we're going to get them. If the mayor disappeared while he was at home, maybe there's something inside that can tell us what happened." I knew he was right, but it still felt like a violation. Nevertheless, I nodded my assent. "Okay, but let's be careful not to disturb anything more than we have to." Jake tried the front door, which was unsurprisingly locked. He looked around, then picked up a large decorative rock from the garden. "Wait," I exclaimed. "There's a spare key under the mat. Everyone knows about it, but no one would dare use it. Small town trust, you know?" Jake raised an eyebrow but set the rock down and lifted the welcome mat. Sure enough, A key glinted in the morning sun. He picked it up and unlocked the door, which swung open with an ominous creak. The interior of the mayor's house was immaculate, everything in its place. It looked like a museum or a stage set, perfect, but lifeless. "Hello?" I called out, more out of habit than any real expectation of a response. "Mayor Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, is anyone here?" Silence answered me. Jake and I exchanged glances before moving further into the house. We checked each room methodically. The living room with its plush sofas and large TV, the dining room with a table set for breakfast that would never be eaten, the kitchen with a coffee pot half full of now cold coffee. As we climbed the stairs to the second floor, a chill ran down my spine. "Jake," I whispered, "does something feel off to you?" He paused, looking back at me. "You mean besides the fact that an entire town has disappeared and we're the only ones left?" I rolled my eyes. "Yes, besides that. I can't put my finger on it, but something about this house feels wrong." Jake was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then his eyes widened. "The temperature," he said. "It's the same throughout the house. No cold spots, no warm areas near vents. It's like the air is stagnant." Now that he mentioned it, I realized he was right. The air felt unnaturally still, as if it hadn't moved in years rather than hours. We continued our search, finding nothing out of the ordinary in the bedrooms or bathrooms. It wasn't until we reached the mayor's home office that we found something truly strange. The office was a mess, completely at odds with the rest of the meticulously kept house. Papers were strewn across the desk and floor, drawers hung open, and books had been pulled from the shelves. "What happened here?" I breathed, taking in the chaos. Jake was already rifling through the papers on the desk. "It looks like someone was searching for something, and they were in a hurry." I picked up a crumpled paper from the floor, smoothing it out. My blood ran cold as I read its contents. "Jake," I said, my voice shaking, "you need to see this." He came over, peering over my shoulder at the document. It was a letter, addressed to Mayor Thompson, with an official government seal at the top. "Project Dreamcatcher," Jake read aloud. "What the hell is that?" I shook my head, scanning the rest of the letter. "I don't know, but look at this part. The simulation is ready for the next phase. All residents of Millbrook will be transferred on May 15th at precisely 800 hours. Any anomalies or resistors are to be reported immediately." Jake snatched the paper from my hands, reading it again. "Simulation? Transfer? What does this mean, Olivia?" I felt like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. I don't know. But May 15th at 8 a.m., that's when everyone disappeared, when the clock stopped. Jake's face had gone pale. "Except for us. We're the anomalies." The implications of what we discovered crashed over me like a tidal wave. My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, my back against the mayor's desk. Jake crouched beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "This can't be real," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "My family, my friends, my students, they can't all be part of some government experiment." Jake's grip on my shoulder tightened. "We don't know that for sure. This could be, I don't know, some kind of elaborate hoax." I looked up at him, seeing the doubt in his eyes even as he tried to reassure me. "You don't believe that any more than I do," I said quietly. He sighed, sitting down next to me. "No, I don't. But what other explanation is there? That our entire town has been sucked into some kind of simulation? That we're the only ones who somehow escaped?" We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. Finally, I took a deep breath and stood up, offering my hand to Jake. "I don't know what's going on," I said as I pulled him to his feet. "But I do know one thing. We can't stay here. We need to find out more about this Project Dreamcatcher, and we need to figure out why we're still here." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "You're right. And we need to be careful. If we really are anomalies, Someone might be looking for us. As if on cue, a low, distant hum filled the air. We rushed to the window, our hearts pounding. In the distance, barely visible against the blue sky, was a black helicopter, heading straight for Millbrook. Jake and I locked eyes, the same thought passing between us. We weren't alone anymore, and whoever was coming might not be friendly. "We need to go," Jake said urgently. "Now." Without another word, we raced out of the mayor's house, the mysterious letter clutched in my hand. As we ran through the empty streets of Millbrook, the sound of the approaching helicopter growing louder, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was only just beginning. The rhythmic thump of the helicopter blades grew louder, spurring Jake and me to run faster through the deserted streets of Millbrook. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but fear propelled me forward. "Quick, in here," Jake shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the town hall. We sprinted up the steps and I fumbled with my keyring, searching for the master key I'd been given as a longtime resident and teacher. "Hurry," Jake urged, his eyes fixed on the sky. "I'm trying," I snapped, finally locating the right key and jamming it into the lock. The door swung open and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. We stood in the dimly lit foyer, chests heaving as we caught our breath. The sound of the helicopter was muffled now, but still audible, circling overhead. "Do you think they saw us?" I whispered. Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But we can't take any chances. We need to find a place to hide and figure out our next move." I nodded, trying to think through the panic clouding my mind. "The basement," I said suddenly. "There's an old fallout shelter in the basement. It was built during the Cold War. Nobody uses it anymore, but it should still be secure." "Perfect," Jake agreed. "Lead the way." We made our way through the empty halls of the town hall, our footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. Family portraits of Millbrook's founding families lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us accusingly. I shivered, averting my gaze. At the end of a long corridor, we found the door leading to the basement. It creaked open, revealing a set of steep stairs descending into darkness. "Watch your step," I warned, fumbling for the light switch. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows on the concrete walls. We descended carefully, the air growing cooler and mustier with each step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a large, cluttered room filled with old filing cabinets, discarded furniture, and dusty boxes. "The shelter should be through there," I said, pointing to a heavy metal door on the far wall. As we picked our way through the maze of forgotten items, something caught Jake's eye. "Hold on," he said, stopping abruptly. "What's that?" He was pointing at a stack of cardboard boxes labeled Project Dreamcatcher, Classified. My heart skipped a beat. "Oh my God," I breathed. "It's here. It's been here all along." We exchanged a look of disbelief before rushing to the boxes. Jake lifted the lid off the top one, revealing stacks of folders and documents. "We hit the jackpot," he murmured, pulling out a handful of papers. I grabbed a folder, my hands shaking as I opened it. Inside were what looked like scientific reports, filled with complex diagrams and technical jargon I couldn't begin to understand. "Jake, look at this," I said, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom of the page. "It says something about neural interface technology and shared consciousness simulation." Jake leaned in, his brow furrowed as he read. "This is insane," he muttered. "It's talking about transferring an entire population's consciousness into some kind of virtual reality." A chill ran down my spine. But why? Why would they do this to us? Before Jake could answer, a loud bang echoed from upstairs. We froze, eyes wide with fear. "They're here," Jake whispered urgently. "We need to hide. Now." We grabbed as many documents as we could carry and rushed to the fallout shelter door. It was heavy, but together we managed to heave it open. We slipped inside, pulling it shut behind us with a resounding clang. The shelter was small but well equipped. Metal bunk beds lined one wall, while shelves stocked with canned food and water jugs occupied another. A battery-powered lamp on a central table provided dim illumination. We collapsed onto the lower bunks, our hearts pounding. For several tense minutes we sat in silence, straining to hear any sound from outside. But the shelter was well insulated, and no noise penetrated its thick walls. Finally, Jake spoke. "We should be safe here for now. Let's see what we can learn from these documents." We spread the papers out on the table, creating a chaotic mosaic of scientific reports, memos, and hand-scrawled notes. As we pored over them, a chilling picture began to emerge. Project Dreamcatcher, I read aloud from what appeared to be an executive summary, is a groundbreaking initiative aimed at studying human consciousness and social dynamics in a controlled environment. By transferring the entire population of a small town into a shared virtual reality, we can observe and manipulate social interactions on an unprecedented scale. Jake's face was grim as he looked up from his own stack of papers. "It gets worse," he said. "According to this, they've been planning this for years. They chose Millbrook because of its isolated location and close-knit community. They've been monitoring everyone, gathering data, preparing for this abduction." I felt sick to my stomach. But how? How could they possibly transfer people's consciousness into a computer? Jake held up a diagram. "It looks like they developed some kind of neural interface. They must have found a way to implant it without anyone knowing. Maybe through the water supply or..." He trailed off, his face suddenly pale. "Olivia," he said slowly, "when was the last time you had a flu shot?" I frowned, thinking back. "About 6 months ago. There was a big push for everyone in town to get vaccinated. They even set up a clinic at the school." My eyes widened as the implication hit me. "Oh God, you don't think..." Jake nodded grimly. "It would have been the perfect cover. A town-wide vaccination program, administered by trusted local medical staff. No one would have suspected a thing." I felt violated, betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. "But why didn't it work on us? Why are we still here?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe the interface didn't take properly, or maybe..." He hesitated, then continued. "Maybe we're different somehow. Maybe there's something about our brains that made us resistant to the transfer." A thought struck me. "Jake, you said you're not from here. Did you get a flu shot in the last year?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I've been meaning to, but I've been so busy with work. I kept putting it off." "So that's why you're still here," I mused. "But it doesn't explain me." We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The implications of what we'd discovered were staggering. Our entire town, everyone we knew and loved, had been forcibly transferred into some kind of virtual reality. And for some reason, Jake and I were the only ones left behind. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice small in the confines of the shelter. Jake ran a hand through his hair, his expression determined. "We need to find a way to bring them back. There has to be a way to reverse the transfer." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. "You're right, and we need to expose what's been done here. The world needs to know about Project Dreamcatcher." Just then, a muffled sound came from outside the shelter. We froze, holding our breath. It came again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving around in the basement. Jake put a finger to his lips, then pointed to the far corner of the shelter. There, partially hidden behind a stack of supplies, was an old radio setup. We crept over to it, careful not to make a sound. Jake examined the equipment, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "This is a shortwave radio," he whispered. "If I can get it working, we might be able to call for help." As Jake fiddled with the radio, I kept my ear pressed to the shelter door, listening intently. The footsteps seemed to be moving around the basement as if searching for something, or someone. After what felt like an eternity, Jake let out a quiet exclamation of triumph. "I've got it," he whispered excitedly. "It's old, but it's functional. We can broadcast on multiple frequencies." I turned to him, hope and fear warring in my chest. "But who do we call?" Who can we trust? Jake's expression was grim but determined. Anyone, everyone. We need to get the word out about what's happened here. It's our only chance of saving our town, and maybe stopping this from happening to anyone else. As Jake prepared to send out our desperate call for help, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something much bigger than we could imagine. Whatever happened next would not just determine the fate of Millbrook, but potentially the future of humanity itself. With trembling fingers, Jake adjusted the dial and pressed the transmit button. "This is an emergency broadcast from Millbrook, Maine," he began, his voice steady despite the fear I knew he must be feeling. "To anyone who can hear this, our town has been subjected to an illegal government experiment. The entire population has been transferred into a virtual reality against their will. We need help. Please, if you're receiving this, contact the authorities. And be warned, they might be coming for your town next." As Jake's message went out into the ether, we could only hope that someone, somewhere, was listening, and that help would arrive before it was too late. The rhythmic static of the shortwave radio filled the cramped fallout shelter, punctuated only by Jake's repeated distress calls. Hours had passed since we'd first broadcast our plea for help, but so far we'd received nothing but silence in return. I paced the small space, my nerves frayed and my mind racing. "Maybe no one's listening," I said, voicing the fear that had been growing with each passing minute. "Or maybe they don't believe us. I mean, would you believe a crazy story about an entire town being sucked into a virtual reality?" Jake looked up from the radio, his eyes bloodshot from strain. "We have to keep trying, Olivia. It's our only chance." I nodded, collapsing onto one of the lower bunks. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going was starting to wear off, leaving me feeling drained and overwhelmed. "You should get some rest," Jake said, his voice softening. "I'll keep watch and man the radio." I wanted to argue, to insist that I could keep going, but exhaustion was pulling at me with inexorable force. "Wake me in a few hours," I mumbled, already feeling sleep creeping in at the edges of my consciousness. "I will," Jake promised, but his voice seemed to come from far away as I drifted off. I awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the dim light and unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the past day came rushing back, and I sat up with a gasp. "Jake?" I called out, panic rising in my throat when I didn't see him immediately. "I'm here," came his reply from the far corner of the shelter. He was hunched over a stack of documents, a pen in hand as he scribbled notes on a pad of paper. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by guilt. "Why didn't you wake me?" I asked, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "How long was I out?" Jake glanced at his watch. "About 6 hours. You needed the rest, and honestly, there wasn't much to report. The radio's been quiet." I joined him at the table, peering at his notes. "What have you found?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. "It's complicated. From what I can gather, Project Dreamcatcher isn't just about observing social dynamics. They're testing the limits of human consciousness, seeing how far they can push the boundaries of shared reality." A chill ran down my spine. "What does that mean for the people of Millbrook? Are they safe?" Jake's hesitation before answering did nothing to allay my fears. "Physically, probably. Their bodies are likely in some kind of stasis. But mentally? I don't know. The documents talk about stress testing and scenario manipulation. I think they might be putting the town through some kind of shared ordeal in the simulation. The thought of my friends and family being subjected to unknown horrors made me feel sick. "We have to stop this," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. Jake reached out, placing his hand over mine. The warmth of his touch was surprisingly comforting. "We will," he said with a conviction that I desperately wanted to believe. "But first we need to understand what we're up against." We spent the next few hours poring over the documents, piecing together the fragments of information into a coherent picture. The more we learned, the more horrified I became. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a paragraph in one of the reports. They're not just observing. They're actively manipulating the simulation, introducing conflicts and challenges to see how the townspeople react. Jake nodded grimly. It's like they're treating the entire town as lab rats in some twisted psychological experiment. As we worked, we found ourselves sharing stories about our lives, our hopes and fears. Despite the dire circumstances, or perhaps because of them, I felt a connection growing between us. I never wanted to be a teacher, you know, I confessed during a break in our research. I always dreamed of being a writer. But life has a way of steering you down unexpected paths. Jake smiled, a warm gesture that reached his eyes despite the exhaustion evident on his face. It's not too late, he said. When we get out of this, you should write about it. God knows it would make one hell of a story. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. Right. The Day My Town Disappeared by Olivia Parker. I'm sure it would fly off the shelves. Hey, stranger things have happened, Jake quipped. Then his expression turned serious. You know, Olivia, I'm glad you're here with me. I mean, I'm not glad about the circumstances, but I don't think I could have handled this alone. I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. I feel the same way, I admitted. I just wish... My words were cut off by a sudden burst of static from the radio. We both jumped, rushing over to the device. Hello, is anyone there? A voice crackled through the speaker, faint but unmistakable. Jake grabbed the microphone. Yes, we're here. This is Jake Donovan and Olivia Parker from Millbrook, Maine. Who is this? There was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity before the voice came back, clearer this time. This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez from MIT. We picked up your distress signal. Is it true what you said about your town? I felt a surge of hope so strong it made me dizzy. Yes, I said, leaning in close to the microphone. It's all true. Everyone's gone, transferred into some kind of virtual reality. We have documents, proof of a government project called Dreamcatcher. My God, Dr. Rodriguez breathed. We've heard rumors about experiments like this, but nothing concrete until now. Listen carefully. You're in danger. If what you're saying is true, the people behind this won't let you expose them easily. What should we do? Jake asked, his voice tense. Stay hidden, Dr. Rodriguez advised. We're mobilizing a team to come to Millbrook, but it will take time. Can you hold out for another 24 hours? Jake and I exchanged glances. Our food and water supplies were limited, and we had no idea how long it would be before whoever was searching for us found the fallout shelter. We'll try, I said, trying to inject more confidence into my voice than I felt. But please hurry. We will, Dr. Rodriguez promised. And whatever you do, don't let them capture you. If they get their hands on you, you'll disappear just like the rest of your town. Stay safe and we'll contact you again when we're close. The transmission ended, leaving us in a silence that felt both hopeful and terrifying. What now? I asked, looking to Jake. He stood up, a new determination in his stance. Now, we prepare. We need to be ready to move if they find us, and we need to gather all the evidence we can to take with us. As we set about our tasks, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of guilt. Jake, I said hesitantly, do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? I mean, what if exposing this project puts everyone in the simulation at risk? Jake paused in his work, considering my words. I've thought about that, he admitted. But think about it this way. If we don't stop this, how many other towns might they target? How many other lives might they destroy? We have to believe that exposing the truth is the right thing to do. I nodded, his words reassuring me. You're right, it's a lot of responsibility. It is, Jake agreed, moving closer to me. But we're in this together. Whatever happens, we face it as a team. As he spoke, I realized how much our relationship had changed in such a short time. We'd gone from strangers to partners, bound together by extraordinary circumstances and a shared determination to save our town. A team, I repeated, managing a small smile. I like the sound of that. Jake returned the smile, and for a moment, the weight of our situation felt a little lighter. But as we turned back to our preparations, the gravity of what lay ahead settled over us once more. The next 24 hours would be crucial. We had to stay hidden, stay alive, and be ready to act when help arrived. And all the while, the fate of an entire town, my town, hung in the balance. As night fell outside our underground sanctuary, I found myself both dreading and anticipating what the new day would bring. Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake and I took turns monitoring the radio, sifting through the documents and trying to rest, though sleep remained elusive. The weight of our situation pressed down on us, making each minute feel like an eternity. As the digital clock on the radio flipped to 3:17 a.m., I found myself staring at the thick metal door of the fallout shelter, my mind racing. "Jake," I whispered, not wanting to startle him if he'd managed to doze off. "Yeah?" His response was immediate, alert. He hadn't been sleeping either. I turned to face him in the dim light. "I've been thinking. We can't just sit here and wait. What if Dr. Rodriguez's team doesn't make it in time? What if the people behind Project Dreamcatcher find us first?" Jake sat up, his expression serious. "What are you suggesting?" I took a deep breath. "I think we need to go back to the town hall. There might be more information there, something we missed, and I have a hunch about where to look." Jake's brow furrowed. "It's risky. We don't know if they're still out there searching for us." "I know," I admitted. "But staying here feels like we're just waiting to be caught. At least if we're moving, we have a chance of finding something that could help us." There was a long pause as Jake considered my words. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but we need to be careful. In and out as quickly as possible." We gathered what we could carry: documents, a few supplies, and the handheld radio Dr. Rodriguez had instructed us to keep on at all times. With a shared look of determination, we pushed open the heavy shelter door and stepped out into the basement. The air felt different, stale and heavy with an underlying tension. We made our way up the stairs, every creak of the old wood setting my nerves on edge. At the top, Jake slowly opened the door to the main floor, peering out cautiously. "Clear," he whispered, and we slipped into the hallway. The town hall was eerily silent, our footsteps echoing despite our attempts to move quietly. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us like grasping fingers. "Where are we going?" Jake asked in a low voice. I pointed down the hall. "The mayor's office. There was something odd about it when we searched it before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Now I think I know what it was." We reached the office door, which stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. Inside, the room was just as we'd left it. Papers strewn about, drawers open, books scattered on the floor. "What are we looking for?" Jake asked, his eyes scanning the chaos. I moved to the large oak desk that dominated the room. "Help me move this," I said, putting my shoulder against the heavy piece of furniture. Jake joined me, and together we managed to shift the desk a few feet. As it moved, a soft scraping sound caught my attention. I dropped to my knees, running my hands over the floorboards beneath where the desk had been. "There!" I exclaimed in a hushed voice, feeling a slight give in one of the boards. I pried at it with my fingers, and it lifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Jake crouched beside me, his eyes wide. "What is it?" I reached into the compartment, my fingers closing around a small, leather-bound book. As I pulled it out, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Jake snatched it up, unfolding it carefully. "It's a map," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "Of Millbrook, but different. There are markings all over it." I flipped open the book, realizing it was a journal. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, but unmistakably belonged to Mayor Thompson. "Jake," I breathed. "I think this is the mayor's personal account of Project Dreamcatcher." We huddled together, poring over the journal and map by the dim light of the moon streaming through the window. What we found chilled me to the bone. He knew, I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Mayor Thompson knew about the project from the beginning. He helped them set it up. Jake's jaw clenched as he read over my shoulder. It gets worse. Look at this entry from 3 months ago. The neural interfaces are fully integrated. The townspeople suspect nothing. We're ready to begin the final phase. I felt sick. The mayor, a man I'd known my entire life, had betrayed us all. But why? I asked, the question burning in my throat. Why would he do this to his own town? Jake flipped through more pages, his expression growing darker. Power, he said grimly, and money. Lots of it. According to this, he was promised a position of authority in the new post-simulation society they're planning. Post-simulation society, I echoed, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. What does that even mean? Before Jake could answer, a new sound cut through the silence, the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades growing louder by the second. They're back, Jake hissed, grabbing my arm. We need to go, now. We scrambled to our feet, shoving the journal and map into our backpack. As we raced for the door, a beam of light swept across the window. Voices could be heard outside, sharp and authoritative. This way, I whispered, pulling Jake towards a side door I knew led to a rarely used staircase. We slipped through just as the main doors of the town hall burst open, heavy footsteps echoing through the building. We descended the stairs as quickly and quietly as we could, emerging into a small courtyard behind the town hall. The helicopter's searchlights swept back and forth across the town, its beam uncomfortably close. We can't go back to the shelter, Jake said, his eyes darting around for an escape route. They'll find us there for sure. I nodded, my mind racing. The old mill, I said suddenly. It's abandoned, on the outskirts of town. We might be able to hide there until Dr. Rodriguez arrives. Jake hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Lead the way. We took off running, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The sound of the helicopter and shouting voices spurred us on, adrenaline masking the burning in our lungs and legs. As we reached the edge of town, the old mill loomed before us, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. We ducked inside, the musty smell of abandoned machinery filling our nostrils. Up there, Jake whispered, pointing to a rusted catwalk that ran along the upper level of the building. We climbed carefully, the metal groaning ominously beneath our weight. From our vantage point, we could see the town spread out before us, the searchlight from the helicopter sweeping across familiar streets now made alien by their emptiness. The reality of our situation hit me anew. An entire town gone, vanished into some digital realm, while Jake and I remained, the only ones left to fight for their freedom. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely audible over the distant sound of the search party. Jake pulled out the journal and map, spreading them out on the catwalk. We read, he said grimly. We learn everything we can about Project Dreamcatcher, and then we figure out how to shut it down. As we pored over the mayor's writings, a picture began to emerge, one more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Project Dreamcatcher wasn't just about observing social dynamics or testing the limits of consciousness. It was the first step in a plan to reshape society itself, to create a world where reality could be controlled and manipulated at will. They're playing God, I whispered, the full implications hitting me like a physical blow. Jake's face was pale in the moonlight that filtered through the mill's broken windows. And we're the only ones who can stop them. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we sat in silence, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. The journal and map before us held the key to saving our town, and possibly the world, but they also painted a target on our backs. I looked at Jake, seeing my own mix of fear and determination mirrored in his eyes. Whatever happens, I said, reaching out to take his hand, we're in this together. He squeezed my hand, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Together, he agreed. As the sun rose on a new day, We knew that the real battle was just beginning. With the truth of Project Dreamcatcher in our hands and a team of allies on the way, we had a chance, slim as it might be, to set things right. But as the sound of the helicopter grew closer once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time was running out. The race to save Millbrook, and perhaps the very nature of reality itself, was on. The old mill creaked and groaned around us as the morning light filtered through its broken windows. Jake and I had spent the night huddled on the rusted catwalk, poring over Mayor Thompson's journal and the mysterious map. Our eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and tension coiled in my muscles like a spring wound too tight. "We should try to contact Dr. Rodriguez again," Jake said, breaking the silence that had settled over us. He reached for the handheld radio, but I caught his wrist, stopping him. "Wait," I said, a nagging doubt finally finding voice. "How do we know we can trust her? For all we know, she could be part of Project Dreamcatcher too." Jake's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? She's our only ally right now." I shook my head, standing up to pace the narrow catwalk. "Think about it, Jake. How convenient was it that she picked up our distress call? That she just happened to know about experiments like this?" "Olivia," Jake said, his voice taking on a cautious tone, "you're not thinking clearly. We're both exhausted and stressed. Dr. Rodriguez is trying to help us." But now that the seed of doubt had taken root, I couldn't shake it. I turned to face him, my eyes narrowing. "And what about you? How do I know I can trust you? You just happened to be passing through town when everyone disappeared. That's awfully convenient too, don't you think?" Jake stood up slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Olivia, calm down. You know me. We've been through this together." "Do I know you?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I've known you for what, 2 days? In that time, my entire world has fallen apart. How do I know you're not behind all of this?" A flash of hurt crossed Jake's face, quickly replaced by frustration. "That's ridiculous. If I were behind this, why would I be helping you? Why would I be running and hiding right alongside you?" "To keep an eye on me," I said, the words tumbling out as my mind raced with possibilities. "To make sure I don't figure out too much. Maybe I'm part of the experiment too, and you're here to observe my reactions." Jake took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away. He stopped, a look of genuine pain in his eyes. "Olivia, please. You're letting paranoia get the best of you. We need to trust each other. We're all we've got right now." I wanted to believe him. Part of me knew I was being irrational, that the stress and fear were warping my judgment. But another part, the part that had been betrayed by the mayor and the entire system I'd trusted my whole life, couldn't let go of the suspicion. "Prove it," I said, my voice shaking. "Prove to me that you're not involved in this." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "How am I supposed to prove a negative? I can't prove I'm not involved any more than you can." His words hit me like a splash of cold water. He was right, of course. I had no way of proving my own innocence either. The realization made me feel ashamed of my outburst, but the doubt still lingered. "I'm sorry," I said softly, slumping back against the railing of the catwalk. "I don't know what came over me. It's just, everything's so messed up. I don't know what to believe anymore." Jake's expression softened. He approached me slowly, as if afraid I might bolt. When I didn't move away, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. We're both under immense pressure. It's natural to have doubts. But Olivia, if we start turning on each other, they've already won." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. I do trust you, Jake. I'm scared." He pulled me into a hug, and I let myself sink into the comfort of human contact. For a moment, we just stood there, two lost souls clinging to each other in a world gone mad. The moment was shattered by a crackle from the radio. We jumped apart, both reaching for the device. Jake got to it first, fumbling with the controls. "Hello? Dr. Rodriguez," he said urgently. A voice came through, distorted by static but recognizable. "Jake? Olivia? Thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you?" I hesitated, my earlier doubts resurging. Jake must have sensed my reluctance because he squeezed my hand reassuringly before answering. "We're safe for now. What's your status?" "We're about an hour out from Millbrook," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "But we've hit a complication. There's a roadblock on the main highway into town. Military presence. We're going to have to find another way in." Jake and I exchanged worried glances. "Military?" I whispered. "It's worse than we thought." Jake nodded grimly before turning back to the radio. "Dr. Rodriguez, we've made some discoveries. The situation is more complex than we realized. We have evidence that this goes beyond just Millbrook. They're planning something bigger." There was a pause on the other end, filled only with static. When Dr. Rodriguez spoke again, her voice was tense. "What kind of evidence?" Jake looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded, making a decision to trust. For now. He quickly outlined what we'd found in the mayor's journal, the plans for a post-simulation society, and the implications of the project's true scope. This is huge," Dr. Rodriguez said when he finished. "If what you're saying is true, this could change everything. We need to get that evidence out, make it public before they can stop us." "How?" I asked, leaning in close to the radio. "They've got the town locked down. We're trapped here." "Not necessarily," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "There's an old fire road that leads out of town to the west. It's not on most maps, but if you can get there, we might be able to extract you." Jake was already unfolding the map we'd found with the journal. "I see it," he said after a moment of searching. "It's about 3 miles from our current position." "Can you make it there?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. I looked at Jake, seeing my own mix of fear and determination reflected in his eyes. "We'll have to," I said. "It's our only shot." "All right," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Head for the fire road. We'll meet you there in 2 hours. And Jake, Olivia, be careful. If they catch you now, all of this will have been for nothing." The radio went silent, leaving Jake and I staring at each other in the dusty light of the mill. "Well," Jake said, a wry smile tugging at his lips, "I guess we're not done running yet." I couldn't help but let out a small, slightly hysterical laugh. "I guess not. You know, when I wished for more excitement in my life, this isn't exactly what I had in mind." Jake chuckled, the sound warming something inside me. "Careful what you wish for, huh?" As we gathered our meager supplies and prepared to set out, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The doubts and fears were still there, lurking at the edges of my mind, but I pushed them aside. We had a mission now, a clear goal. Everything else could wait. "Jake," I said as we stood at the top of the stairs leading down from the catwalk, "I really am sorry about before. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here with me through all this." He turned to me, his expression serious but warm. "We're in this together, Olivia. No matter what happens, no matter what we find out, I've got your back. I hope you know that." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I do. And I've got yours." With one last look at the abandoned mill that had been our sanctuary, we descended the stairs and slipped out into the morning light. The town that had once been my home now felt alien and threatening, every shadow potentially hiding those who would stop us from exposing the truth. As we set out towards the fire road and what we hoped would be our salvation, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever awaited us beyond Millbrook, whatever truths we would uncover about Project Dreamcatcher and its architects, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of the journal in my backpack seemed to grow heavier with each step, a reminder of the responsibility we carried. The fate of an entire town, perhaps the fate of reality itself, rested on our shoulders. And as Jake and I made our way through the empty streets of Millbrook, I silently vowed that no matter what it took, we would see this through to the end. The sun beat down mercilessly as Jake and I made our way through the deserted streets of Millbrook. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of an empty house settling sent shivers down my spine. The town I'd known my entire life had become an eerie, alien landscape. "We need to pick up the pace," Jake said, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "That fire road is still a good 2 miles away." I nodded, trying to ignore the burning in my legs and the dryness in my throat. We'd been moving non-stop since leaving the old mill, and fatigue was starting to set in. As we rounded a corner onto Maple Street, I suddenly froze. "Wait," I whispered, grabbing Jake's arm. "Look." About 100 yards ahead, a black SUV was parked haphazardly in the middle of the road. 2 men in dark suits were examining something on the ground. Jake pulled me back behind a hedge. "Damn," he muttered. "They must be sweeping the town. We need to find another way around." I peered through the leaves, my heart pounding. One of the men stood up, holding something that glinted in the sunlight. With a jolt, I realized what it was. "My necklace," I gasped. "The one my grandmother gave me. It must have fallen off when we were running last night." Jake's face paled. "They know we were here recently. They'll intensify the search." As if on cue, we heard one of the men speak into a radio. "Base, this is Team 2. We found evidence of recent activity in Sector 4, requesting additional units for a thorough sweep." "Copy that, Team 2. Reinforcements en route." Jake and I exchanged panicked looks. "We need to move now," he said urgently. We backtracked quickly, ducking through backyards and narrow alleys. The sound of more vehicles approaching spurred us on, adrenaline masking our exhaustion. As we cut through the park behind Millbrook Elementary, I stumbled, my foot catching on an exposed root. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my ankle. "Olivia!" Jake was at my side in an instant. "Are you okay?" I tried to stand, but my ankle buckled under me. "I think it's sprained," I said through gritted teeth. Jake looked around frantically, then back at me. "We can't stop. Can you walk at all?" I nodded, though tears of pain were forming in my eyes. "I'll manage. We have to keep going." Jake helped me up, letting me lean on him as we continued our desperate flight. We could hear voices in the distance now, growing closer. "There," Jake said suddenly, pointing to a small shed near the edge of the park. "We can hide there, catch our breath." We limped to the shed as quickly as we could. Jake eased the door open and we slipped inside, closing it behind us. The small space was cramped and musty, filled with old sports equipment and gardening tools. I slid to the floor, stretching out my injured ankle. Jake crouched beside me, gently examining it. "It's swelling pretty badly," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to wrap it." He rummaged through our backpack, pulling out a small first aid kit we'd grabbed from the town hall. As he wrapped an ace bandage around my ankle, I couldn't help but marvel at how steady his hands were despite the dire situation. "Jake," I said softly, "what if we don't make it? What if they catch us?" He paused in his work, looking up at me with determination in his eyes. "We're going to make it, Olivia. We have to. The truth about Project Dreamcatcher needs to come out." I nodded, trying to draw strength from his confidence. "But even if we do get to Dr. Rodriguez, what then? How do we stop something this big?" Jake finished wrapping my ankle and sat back, running a hand through his hair. "One step at a time. First, we get out of Millbrook. Then we get the evidence to people who can use it. After that," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know. But we'll figure it out together." A noise outside made us both freeze. Footsteps coming closer. "Check every building, every possible hiding spot," a gruff voice ordered. They couldn't have gotten far. Jake and I held our breath, hardly daring to move. The footsteps came right up to the shed door. I could see a shadow through the cracks in the wood. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure the door would open, that we'd be discovered. But then the shadow moved on, the footsteps receding. We waited in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, when we were sure the search party had moved on, Jake helped me to my feet. "We need to go," he whispered. "They'll be back to search this area more thoroughly." I tested my weight on my injured ankle. It hurt, but the wrapping helped. "I can manage," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if I was trying to convince Jake or myself. We eased the shed door open, peering out cautiously. The park seemed deserted once more, but we could hear distant voices and the occasional crackle of a radio. "The fire road is just beyond those trees," Jake said, pointing to a dense copse at the edge of the park. "If we can make it there, we might have a chance." I nodded, steeling myself for the pain I knew was coming. "Let's do it." We set off across the open ground of the park, moving as quickly and quietly as my injured ankle would allow. Every step sent jolts of pain up my leg, but I bit my lip and pressed on. We were halfway across when a shout rang out behind us. "There! By the trees!" "Run!" Jake yelled, grabbing my hand. We sprinted for the tree line, my ankle screaming in protest. I could hear footsteps pounding after us, voices yelling orders. Just as we reached the first trees, a gunshot cracked through the air. Bark exploded from a trunk inches from my head. "Keep going," Jake urged, pulling me deeper into the woods. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear our pursuers behind us gaining ground. Suddenly the trees thinned and we burst out onto a narrow dirt road. The fire road. "There!" I gasped, pointing down the road where a cloud of dust was rising. A vehicle was approaching fast. "It could be them," Jake said, his voice tight with tension. "Or it could be Dr. Rodriguez," I countered. "We don't have a choice. We can't outrun them on foot." The decision was made for us, as more shouts erupted from the woods behind us. We ran towards the approaching vehicle, waving our arms frantically. As it got closer, I could make out a battered old Jeep. And behind the wheel... "Dr. Rodriguez!" I cried out in relief. The Jeep screeched to a halt beside us, and a woman with short gray hair and intense eyes leaned out. "Get in, quickly!" Jake practically threw me into the back seat before jumping in himself. Dr. Rodriguez floored the accelerator before he'd even closed the door. We sped down the fire road, the Jeep bouncing and jolting over the uneven surface. In the rearview mirror, I could see several black SUVs emerging from the tree line. "Hold on," Dr. Rodriguez called out. "This is going to get rough." She took a sharp turn off the fire road, plunging us into the dense forest. Branches scraped against the sides of the Jeep as we bounced over rocks and fallen logs. "We've got company," Jake said tensely, looking out the rear window. Two of the SUVs had followed us into the woods. Dr. Rodriguez's face was a mask of concentration as she navigated the treacherous terrain. "There's a ravine up ahead," she said. "If we can make it across, they won't be able to follow." The ravine loomed before us, a gaping chasm in the earth. A rickety wooden bridge spanned its width, looking barely sturdy enough for foot traffic, let alone a vehicle. "You're not serious," I said, my voice rising in panic. Dr. Rodriguez's only response was to accelerate. We hit the bridge at full speed, the old wood groaning and cracking beneath our wheels. For a terrifying moment, I was sure we were going to plunge into the ravine. But then we were across, the Jeep's tires finding purchase on solid ground once more. Behind us, I heard a tremendous crash. One of the pursuing SUVs had attempted to follow us across the bridge. It now lay in a crumpled heap at the bottom of the ravine. "We made it," Jake breathed, his face pale but relieved. Dr. Rodriguez didn't slow down. "We're not out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively, but we've bought ourselves some time." As we continued our wild ride through the forest, I clutched the backpack containing Mayor Thompson's journal and the map. We'd escaped Millbrook, but I knew this was just the beginning. The truth about Project Dreamcatcher was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And as I looked at Jake and Dr. Rodriguez, I realized that whatever came next, I wasn't alone in this fight. The race against time continued. But now, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a chance, slim as it might be, to expose the truth and save our town. As the Jeep sped on, carrying us towards an uncertain future, I made a silent vow. No matter what it took, no matter the cost, We would see this through to the end. For Millbrook, for the truth, and for the very nature of reality itself. The battered Jeep rumbled to a stop in a small clearing, hidden from view by dense foliage. Dr. Elena Rodriguez killed the engine, and for a moment, the only sound was our heavy breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. "We should be safe here for now," Dr. Rodriguez said, turning to face Jake and me in the back seat. "They won't be able to track us easily through this terrain." I nodded, wincing as I shifted my weight. The adrenaline was wearing off, and my ankle throbbed mercilessly. Jake noticed my discomfort and gently helped me out of the Jeep. "We need to take a look at that ankle," he said, his voice laced with concern. Dr. Rodriguez rummaged in the back of the Jeep, producing a more comprehensive first aid kit than the one we'd had. "Let me," she said, kneeling beside me as Jake helped me sit on a fallen log. As she expertly examined and rewrapped my ankle, I took the opportunity to really look at her for the first time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was a woman in her early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and streaks of gray in her short black hair. Her hands were steady and sure as she worked, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. "Thank you," I said softly, "for coming to get us, for believing us." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "You're welcome, but don't thank me yet. We're not out of this by a long shot." Jake, who had been keeping watch at the edge of the clearing, rejoined us. "Speaking of which, what's our next move? We can't stay here forever." Dr. Rodriguez finished with my ankle and stood, her expression grave. "No, we can't. But before we go any further, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with here. You mentioned in your radio transmission that you found evidence that this goes beyond just Millbrook. I need to see it." Jake and I exchanged glances. After a moment's hesitation, I reached into my backpack and pulled out Mayor Thompson's journal and the map. "Here," I said, handing them to Dr. Rodriguez. "It's all in there. The plans for Project Dreamcatcher, the post-simulation society they're trying to create. Everything." Dr. Rodriguez took the items, her eyes widening as she began to flip through the journal. For several tense minutes, the only sound was the rustling of pages and the occasional sharp intake of breath from the doctor. Finally, she looked up, her face pale. "This is... my God. This is worse than we imagined. They're not just experimenting with virtual reality. They're trying to rewrite the very fabric of human consciousness." "But why?" Jake asked, voicing the question that had been burning in my mind since we first discovered the truth. "What's the end game here?" Dr. Rodriguez sank down onto the log beside me, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. "Control," she said simply. "Ultimate, total control. Imagine a world where reality itself can be manipulated, where those in power can literally shape the perceptions and experiences of entire populations. It's the ultimate form of social engineering." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "So everyone in Millbrook, all our friends and family, they're just test subjects? Guinea pigs for this insane experiment?" Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. And if they succeed with Millbrook, they'll move on to larger populations, cities, countries, potentially the entire world." A heavy silence fell over us as we grappled with the enormity of what we'd uncovered. It was Jake who finally broke it, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "So what do we do? How do we stop this?" Dr. Rodriguez stood, pacing the small clearing as she thought. "We need to shut down the project, obviously, but more than that, we need to expose it. The world needs to know what's happening, what could happen to them." "But how?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "We're fugitives. They'll be looking for us everywhere. And even if we could get the word out, who would believe us? It sounds insane." "Not if we have proof," Dr. Rodriguez said, a spark of determination in her eyes. "The journal is a start, but we need more. We need to find the central hub of Project Dreamcatcher, the place where they're controlling the simulation. If we can access their systems, download their data, we could blow this whole thing wide open," Jake finished, excitement building in his voice. But a cold realization was dawning on me. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If we shut down the project, what happens to everyone in the simulation? To Millbrook?" The excitement drained from Jake's face, replaced by dawning horror. Dr. Rodriguez's expression was grim but resolute. "We don't know for certain," she said carefully. "Best case scenario, they wake up, perhaps with no memory of what happened. Worst case..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. "So we're talking about potentially sacrificing an entire town to stop this project," I said, my voice shaking. "My town, my family, my students." Jake knelt beside me, taking my hand in his. "Olivia, I know it's an impossible choice, but think about what happens if we don't stop this. How many more towns will they take? How many more lives will be destroyed?" Tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over onto my cheeks. "I know. God, I know you're right. But these are people I've known my whole life. How can I make that choice for them?" Dr. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes in situations like this, we have to make impossible choices for the greater good. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's the reality we're facing." I looked up at her, suddenly angry. "Easy for you to say. It's not your family on the line." A flash of pain crossed Dr. Rodriguez's face. "You're wrong," she said softly. "My sister and her family live in Millbrook. I haven't been able to reach them since this all started. That's why I was listening for distress calls, why I came to help. They're in there too." Shame washed over me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." She shook her head. "It's all right. We're all under immense stress. But Olivia, Jake is right. If we don't stop this now, it will only spread. More families will be torn apart, more lives destroyed. We have to think about the bigger picture." I nodded, wiping away my tears. I know you're both right. It's too much. How did we end up here? Having to make decisions that affect so many lives." Jake squeezed my hand. "We didn't choose this, Olivia, but we're the ones in a position to do something about it. We have a responsibility now, whether we want it or not." Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat. "There might be a way to minimize the risk," she said cautiously. "If we can access the project's systems, we might be able to find a way to safely disconnect people from the simulation before we shut it down. It's a long shot, but it's worth trying." Hope flared in my chest. "You think that's possible?" "I don't know," Dr. Rodriguez admitted, "but I have contacts, other scientists who've been investigating projects like this in secret. If we can get this information to them, maybe we can find a solution." Jake stood up, a new determination in his stance. "Then that's what we do. We find the project's hub, we get the data, and we find a way to save everyone. Millbrook and the world." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm in. Whatever it takes, we see this through." Dr. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Good, because from here on out it only gets harder. We're not just fighting against Project Dreamcatcher anymore. We're fighting for the future of human consciousness itself." As we began to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The choices we made in the coming days would have repercussions far beyond anything we could imagine. But as I looked at Jake and Dr. Rodriguez, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were an unlikely trio, a high school English teacher, a software engineer, and a scientist. But together we just might have a chance to change the course of history. Whatever came next, whatever impossible choices we faced, I knew one thing for certain. We would face them together. For Millbrook, for our loved ones, and for the very nature of reality itself. The pre-dawn air was crisp and heavy with dew as we crouched at the edge of the forest, surveying the sprawling complex before us. The Project Dreamcatcher headquarters loomed in the distance, a sleek, modern building incongruously nestled in the rural Maine landscape. "There it is," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, lowering her night vision binoculars. The heart of the beast. Jake nodded grimly, his face etched with determination. Doesn't look too heavily guarded from the outside. That's something, at least. I shifted uncomfortably, my ankle still tender despite Dr. Rodriguez's expert care. Don't let that fool you, I cautioned. Remember what we saw in the mayor's files. Most of their security is probably internal, electronic. Olivia's right, Dr. Rodriguez agreed. We're not going to be able to just walk in there. We need a plan. We retreated deeper into the woods, gathering around a small tablet that displayed a rough schematic of the building, cobbled together from satellite imagery and the information in Mayor Thompson's journal. Okay, Jake said, taking charge. From what we can tell, the main server room is here in the center of the building. That's where we'll find the core of the Dreamcatcher system. Dr. Rodriguez pointed to a section of the building off to the side. And here's the medical wing. If there's any information about safely disconnecting people from the simulation, it'll be there. I studied the schematic, a knot forming in my stomach. It's a lot of ground to cover. How are we supposed to access both areas and get out before they catch us? A tense silence fell over our little group. We'd spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, gathering what intel we could and formulating a plan. But now, faced with the reality of what we were about to attempt, the enormity of the task seemed overwhelming. Jake was the first to break the silence. We split up, he said, his voice low but firm. Dr. Rodriguez, you take the medical wing. You'll know best what to look for there. Olivia and I will go for the server room. Dr. Rodriguez frowned. It's risky. If one group gets caught, then the other might still succeed, I finished, surprising myself with my resolve. Jake's right. It's our best chance. Dr. Rodriguez studied us both for a long moment before nodding. All right, but we'll need a distraction to get in, something to draw their security away from the entrances. Jake's eyes lit up. I think I have an idea about that. Give me an hour. As Jake set off to prepare his distraction, Dr. Rodriguez and I went over the plan one last time. We synchronized our watches and double-checked our equipment. Compact tablets for downloading data, communication earpieces, and small, non-lethal stun weapons Dr. Rodriguez had procured through her contacts. Olivia, Dr. Rodriguez said softly as we finished our preparations, I want you to know, whatever happens in there, you've shown incredible bravery. Your town, your students, they'd be proud of you. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes but blinked them away. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. I just hope we can save them. Jake returned just as the first hints of dawn were lightening the sky. He was carrying what looked like a modified drone, a mischievous glint in his eye. Our distraction, he announced proudly, rigged up with some small explosives and a pre-programmed flight path. It'll buzz the perimeter, set off a few bangs, and hopefully draw their security to the outer fence line. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, impressed. Not bad for a software engineer. You sure you're not secretly some kind of spy? Jake chuckled, but I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. The gravity of what we were about to do was settling over all of us. It's time, I said, checking my watch. We should move into position. We made our way silently through the woods, approaching the complex from different angles. As we reached the edge of the tree line, Jake turned to me, his expression intense. Olivia, he said softly, there's something I need to tell you in case... I placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. Don't. We're both making it out of there. Tell me after. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Okay, after. With one last shared look, we split up, Dr. Rodriguez heading towards the east side of the complex, while Jake and I approached from the west. At precisely 5:30 a.m., Jake's drone buzzed to life, zipping over the perimeter fence. A series of small explosions followed, accompanied by flashes of light and plumes of smoke. Alarms blared, and we watched as security personnel rushed towards the disturbance. Now, Jake hissed, and we sprinted for the building. Using an electronic lockpick Dr. Rodriguez had provided, we managed to bypass the door security and slip inside. The interior of the complex was a maze of sterile white corridors and locked doors. "Server room should be this way," Jake whispered, consulting the schematic on his tablet. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, our hearts pounding with every footstep. Twice we had to duck into empty rooms to avoid patrolling guards, the seconds ticking by agonizingly slow as we waited for them to pass. Finally, we reached a heavy security door marked Central Data Processing. Jake went to work on the electronic lock while I kept watch. "I'm in," he said after a tense minute. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The server room was massive, rows upon rows of humming machines stretching as far as the eye could see. In the center stood a raised platform with a series of monitors and control panels. "That must be it," I breathed. The core of Project Dreamcatcher. We approached the central console, Jake's fingers flying over the keyboard as he attempted to bypass the security protocols. Come on," he muttered. Suddenly, the largest monitor flickered to life. My heart nearly stopped as an image appeared on the screen, a live feed of Millbrook's town square. But it wasn't the empty, abandoned version we'd left behind. This square was bustling with activity, people going about their day as if nothing was wrong. "Oh my God," I whispered, recognizing familiar faces in the crowd. "It's them. They're all there." Jake nodded grimly. "The simulation. It looks so real." A lump formed in my throat as I watched my friends and neighbors, oblivious to their true situation. How can we just shut this down? "Look at them, Jake. They don't know. They're happy." Jake's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "I know it's hard, Olivia, but remember why we're here. This isn't real. And if we don't stop it, more people will end up trapped like this." I nodded, steeling myself. "You're right. Let's do this." Jake turned back to the console, initiating a data transfer to our tablets. As the progress bar slowly filled, I kept watch on the door, every nerve on high alert. "How much longer?" I asked, tension making my voice tight. "Almost there," Jake replied. "Just a few more." He was cut off by a blaring alarm. Red lights began flashing throughout the server room. No, Jake muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "They've detected the intrusion. They're locking us out." I rushed to his side. "Can you stop it?" He shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "I'm trying, but..." The door to the server room slid open with a hiss. We whirled around to see a team of armed security guards pouring in, weapons trained on us. "Step away from the console and put your hands in the air," the lead guard shouted. Jake and I exchanged a desperate look. We were so close. All the data we needed was right there, just out of reach. In that moment, I made a decision. "Jake," I whispered, "when I say now, hit the floor." Before he could respond, I reached for the stun weapon in my pocket. "Now!" I yelled, bringing the weapon up and firing at the guards. Chaos erupted. Jake dropped to the ground as I fired, the electrical discharge causing the guards to convulse and stumble. But there were too many of them, and I knew we only had seconds. "Jake, the data!" I shouted over the commotion. He scrambled back to the console, frantically trying to complete the transfer. I kept firing, but I could see more guards arriving. Just as I thought all hope was lost, a massive explosion rocked the building. The lights flickered, and for a moment everything went dark. When emergency power kicked in, I saw Jake holding up our tablet triumphantly. "Got it," he yelled. "Let's go." We made a break for it, pushing past the disoriented guards and sprinting down the corridor. Alarms blared all around us, and I could hear shouts and footsteps in pursuit. "What was that explosion?" I gasped as we ran. Jake grinned, despite the dire situation. "Had to be Dr. Rodriguez. Looks like she came through with a distraction of her own." We rounded a corner and nearly collided with Dr. Rodriguez herself. She was sporting a cut on her forehead but looked otherwise unharmed. "Did you get it?" she asked urgently. Jake held up the tablet. Everything. You? She nodded, patting her own tablet. Medical data, disconnection protocols, everything we need. But we've got to move. This place is going to be swarming with security any minute. Together we raced for the exit, alarms and shouts echoing behind us. As we burst out into the early morning light, I allowed myself a moment of hope. We'd done it. We had the data. Now we just had to get it out to the world. But as we sprinted for the tree line, I couldn't shake the image of Millbrook's simulated town square from my mind. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. And the hardest part, deciding the fate of an entire town, of reality itself, was yet to come. The world came rushing back in a dizzying whirl of sensations. Bright lights pierced my eyelids, voices buzzed around me like angry bees, and the antiseptic smell of a hospital assaulted my nostrils. I groaned, trying to make sense of my surroundings. "She's waking up." A familiar voice cut through the fog. "Jake?" I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. Jake's face swam into focus, his features etched with concern and relief. "Olivia, can you hear me?" he asked, squeezing my hand. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. A straw was pressed to my lips, and I sipped gratefully. What happened?" I managed to croak out. Dr. Rodriguez appeared on my other side, her face tired but triumphant. "We did it, Olivia. We exposed Project Dreamcatcher. The whole world knows now." Memories came flooding back, the raid on the complex, our desperate escape, the data we'd stolen. But after that, nothing. "How long have I been out?" I asked, struggling to sit up. Jake gently pushed me back down. "Easy. You've been unconscious for 3 days. The disconnection process was intense." Disconnection process? My heart rate spiked, setting off a nearby monitor. Millbrook? What about everyone in Millbrook? Dr. Rodriguez placed a calming hand on my arm. "They're safe, Olivia. We managed to implement the disconnection protocols. Everyone is being awakened gradually to minimize the shock to their systems." Relief washed over me, so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. "So it worked? We saved them?" Jake and Dr. Rodriguez exchanged a look that sent a chill down my spine. "Mostly," Jake said carefully. "There have been complications." Before I could ask what he meant, the door to my room burst open. A flood of familiar faces poured in. My parents, my sister Emma, friends from town. They surrounded my bed, a cacophony of voices expressing relief and joy. "Oh, sweetie, we were so worried." My mother enveloped me in a tight hug, her tears dampening my hospital gown. My father stood at the foot of the bed, his usual stoic demeanor cracking with emotion. "You did good, kiddo. Real good." As wonderful as it was to see them, to know they were safe, something felt off. Their movements seemed slightly jerky, unnatural, and their eyes, there was a flatness to them that I couldn't quite place. I looked to Jake, a question in my eyes. He nodded slightly, confirming my unspoken suspicion. Something wasn't right. The reunion was cut short by a nurse insisting that I needed rest. As my family and friends filed out, each touching me as if to reassure themselves I was real, Jake and Dr. Rodriguez remained. "What's going on?" I demanded once we were alone. "What aren't you telling me?" Dr. Rodriguez sighed heavily, sinking into a chair. "The disconnection process wasn't perfect, Olivia. We're still trying to understand the full effects, but it seems that prolonged exposure to the simulation has had some lasting impacts on the residents of Millbrook." Jake picked up where she left off. "Some people are experiencing memory gaps. Others are having trouble distinguishing between what happened in the simulation and what's real. And a few..." He trailed off, looking pained. "A few what?" I pressed. "A few seem to be stuck in a kind of limbo," Dr. Rodriguez finished. "Physically present, but mentally, it's as if part of them is still in the simulation." The implications hit me like a physical blow. We'd saved them from the simulation, but at what cost? "But they'll recover, right?" I asked. hating how small and hopeful my voice sounded. With time and therapy, they'll get better? Dr. Rodriguez's expression was grim. We're doing everything we can. But the truth is, we're in uncharted territory here. The human mind wasn't meant to experience what they've been through. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of guilt settle over me. This is my fault. I pushed for this. I wanted to save everyone, and now... Hey, no. Jake's voice was firm as he took my hand. You did the right thing. If we hadn't acted, who knows how many more people would have been trapped? How much further Project Dreamcatcher would have spread? I nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. But the image of my family's oddly flat eyes haunted me. What about the people behind this? I asked. What's happened to them? A small, satisfied smile crossed Dr. Rodriguez's face. The data we stole was damning. Combined with testimonies from awakened Millbrook residents, it was enough to bring down the entire operation. Arrests are being made as we speak, right up to some very high levels of government. Good, I said, a flash of anger cutting through my guilt. They need to pay for what they've done. Jake squeezed my hand. There's something else you should know, Olivia. You're being hailed as a hero. The whole world knows about the brave English teacher who helped expose the biggest conspiracy of the century. I shook my head, uncomfortable with the idea. I'm not a hero. I was just trying to save my town. Nevertheless, Dr. Rodriguez said, people are looking to you now. Your story, your experiences. They could be crucial in helping the public understand what happened and in preventing anything like this from ever happening again. The responsibility felt overwhelming. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted. I'm so tired. Jake's expression softened. You don't have to decide anything now. For the moment, you just need to focus on recovering. As if on cue, exhaustion washed over me. My eyelids felt heavy, and I struggled to keep them open. Rest, Dr. Rodriguez said gently, standing up. We'll be here when you wake up. As I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that this awakening was just the beginning of a new, even more challenging journey. Days passed in a blur of medical tests, debriefings, and tearful reunions. Slowly, I began to piece together the full scope of what had happened after our raid on the Project Dreamcatcher facility. The data we'd stolen had been even more damning than we'd realized. Not only did it expose the full extent of the project, but it also implicated high-ranking officials in multiple governments. The scandal had rocked the world, sparking intense debates about the ethics of virtual reality, the limits of government power, and the nature of consciousness itself. As for Millbrook, the town was struggling to adjust to its new reality. Support services had been set up to help residents cope with the after effects of the simulation, but progress was slow. Some, like my parents, seemed to be recovering well. Others... I stood at the window of my hospital room, looking out at the bustling city below. Everything seemed so normal, so real. And yet, a part of me couldn't help but question it all. Was this truly reality? Or just another, more elaborate simulation? A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Jake entered, carrying a tablet, and wearing an expression that was equal parts excitement and apprehension. Hey, he said softly. How are you feeling? I managed a small smile. Better, still trying to wrap my head around everything. He nodded, understanding. I've got something to show you, if you're up for it. Curiosity piqued, I sat down on the edge of the bed. Jake took a seat beside me, pulling up a video on his tablet. This was posted online yesterday, he explained. It's gone viral. The video showed a man I didn't recognize speaking directly to the camera. His eyes had the same slightly unfocused look I'd seen in many Millbrook residents. My name is David Chen, the man began. I was a software engineer for Project Dreamcatcher. What I'm about to say will sound impossible, but I swear it's the truth. The simulation, it's still running. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Jake paused the video, watching my reaction carefully. There's more, he said. Dozens of similar videos have been popping up. People claiming they can still feel the simulation, that they're living in two worlds at once. But that's impossible, I whispered, even as a part of me wondered if it could be true. We shut it down. We woke everyone up. Jake's expression was troubled. Did we? Or did we just shift the parameters of the simulation? The implications were staggering. If what these people were saying was true, if the simulation was somehow still running. We have to do something, I said, standing up suddenly. We have to find out the truth. Jake stood with me, placing a steadying hand on my arm. Whoa, easy. You're still recovering. Besides, what can we do? We're not exactly equipped to investigate something like this. I turned to him, feeling a familiar determination rising within me. Maybe not, but we've done the impossible before. And if there's even a chance that people are still trapped, that this isn't over, we have to try. Jake studied me for a long moment, before a slow smile spread across his face. You know, when I first met you in that empty town square, I never would have guessed you'd turn out to be such an adrenaline junkie. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising me with its genuineness. What can I say? You've been a bad influence. His expression softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. Olivia, before we dive back into the crazy, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. Something I should have said back in the woods before we raided the facility. My heart skipped a beat. Jake, He silenced me with a gentle finger on my lips, echoing my own gesture from that tense moment before the raid. Let me say it this time, he said softly. Olivia Parker, somewhere between waking up in an empty town and saving the world, I fell in love with you. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, with a clarity I hadn't felt since before this whole ordeal began, I knew exactly what to do. I leaned in and kissed him. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his. I love you too, I whispered. Now, let's go save the world. Again. As we left the hospital room hand in hand, I felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through me. I didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what new mysteries we'd have to unravel. But I did know one thing. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The story of Millbrook, of Project Dreamcatcher, of reality itself. It wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. And this time, we'd write it on our own terms.